He's only seeking custody because he doesn't want to pay child support. How many times have you heard a mother say that? Either online, to other women, to politicians. Heck, I've even heard them say it repeatedly to family court judges in courtrooms. Truth is, I've long lost count at how many times I've heard a mother make that claim, but I'd venture to say it's somewhere in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of times. It's something you hear from mothers, feminists, even judges and lawyers themselves. Yet no one ever asks if it's actually true. No one thinks for even a second to ask the fathers if it's true. Well, my friends, let me give you a little spoiler alert. Not only isn't it true, it's pure, unadulterated fiction. Hi, my name is Dan, and you're watching Men Need to Be Heard, the channel dedicated to raising awareness on the issues that men and boys face in today's society. And today I'm going to be addressing the question, do fathers only seek custody because they want to avoid paying child support? And we're going to bust this myth once and for all. All right, so let's dive in and talk about the myth, because it's not just some casual comment that people make. It's a deeply rooted narrative that's been hammered into public perception for decades now. It also, by the way, proves the old axiom that if you tell a lie often enough, it will become the truth. It's part of our daily discourse now. You hear it on social media. You've heard it on the news. You've heard it in divorce court hallways. Hell, you've probably even heard it from your own family members or friends at some point. And it's not just bitter exes tossing this around either. It comes from feminist blogs, mainstream media talking heads, random Twitter mobs, and even, as I said earlier, the mouths of family court judges and attorneys who are supposed to be impartial. Now here's the point that no one seems to ask that I mentioned earlier. Is it actually true? Has anyone bothered to actually look into whether this claim has any basis in reality? Has anyone bothered to, actually ask the fathers if this is their actual motivation? The answer, of course, is no. And they're not ever going to ask because it would go against the anti-father, anti-male narrative. It would go against decades of people parroting the same lazy anti-father rhetoric because it's convenient and nobody wants to challenge the status quo. And as I said earlier, long story short, it's complete fiction. Pure, unfiltered, unadulterated nonsense. And the crazy part? If you flip the logic for even half a second, it completely falls apart. Because if we're going to accuse dads of only wanting 50-50 custody to avoid paying child support, then we're also going to have to accuse moms who are seeking 100% custody only because they want to get child support. And we should be asking, why are those mothers fighting like hell? Why are they seeking to deny the children access to their father? And it's not because those mothers love their children, not by a long shot. Because in fact it actually hurts their children. Hurts them not just as children, but for the rest of their lives. But you see, mothers don't really care about that. What they care about is getting revenge, getting their hands on the money. And they do it because they've been financially incentivized to do it for the money. Let's be clear, this is not and never has been about what's best for the children. If it were, there wouldn't be any financial incentive to encourage mothers to break up their families and deny fathers access to the children. No, what this is all about is transferring as much money from dads to moms as possible, and oh, by the way, the government getting its cut along the way. Which is why the entire system is designed to be so adversarial. It's why lawyers, judges, politicians, the entire system encourages mothers to do everything and anything they can to maximize their custody. Because the truth is, the more time she has with the kids on paper, the more likely she is to stand to collect. And trust me, there are women out there who know that math like they know the back of their hand. But here's where it gets really twisted. This myth, as I said earlier, has been repeated so often and for so long that it is just accepted as truth by most people. In fact, a lot of people genuinely believe that the entire push for shared parenting laws and 50-50 custody is some grand scheme by fathers' rights groups to collectively duck out of child support. They act like men are sitting in some smoky underground bunker, conspiring to avoid taking responsibility and paying for their children. It's patently absurd, completely ridiculous, and anyone with half a brain molecule can see that. And even if it were true, which it's not, the way child support laws are currently written in most states today, 50-50 custody doesn't make much of a difference when it comes to child support. That's the part no one talks about. That's the part no one wants to talk about because, again, it doesn't fit the narrative. In fact, it disproves it. And I'm not only going to talk about it, I'm going to show how this myth is nothing more than a lie. A deliberate lie designed to create financial gain for some and, in the process, destroy children's lives. So before we dive into how this actually works in 3 states, Texas, New York, and North Carolina, let's peel back the curtain a little bit more on where this myth came from and why it's stuck around for so long. As with most things in life, it comes down to the money. And all you have to do is look at who benefits. It benefits mothers, to be sure, but it also benefits a whole other bunch of players. State and local governments get additional revenue from the federal government, our tax dollars, through something called Title 4D to collect child support. It's designed to incentivize the states to burden fathers with as much child support as possible so that they in turn can then reap billions and billions of dollars in reimbursement for doing so every single year. Judges and courts also get money from the Title 4D slush fund. And attorneys, well, as we all know, attorneys make huge amounts of money off the inherent conflict that is family law. And they do it by using a tactic that's been used throughout history, by making a boogeyman out of someone or a group of someones. And that boogeyman is men in general and dads in particular. We've seen the demonization of men and fathers for decades now in the media, by politicians, across all of society. But that pales in comparison to what is done to good, decent fathers in family court all day, every day. One of the easiest ways to paint a dad as the bad guy in court is to simply accuse him of not wanting to pay and not wanting to take care of his children. Accuse him of being a deadbeat, when in reality, he's the one being beaten dead. It puts him on the defensive instantly and in front of a judge who probably has heard that same accusations 50 times that week, if not that day. And when you've got a society that is already primed to believe that men and fathers are inherently lazy, selfish, and money-driven, it's a slam dunk strategy. One almost as effective as the silver bullet, which I've covered before in this series. It's weaponized stigmatization, and it works, which is exactly why nobody ever stops to question whether it's true, at least until now. Because here's the thing. When you actually talk to fathers going through this stuff, as I have by the thousands upon thousands over the years, you'll quickly find out that they're not fighting for custody to save a few bucks. In fact, to a man, they'll tell you that they know the fight is almost always going to cost them far more money than they'd ever pay in child support, which alone should have you going, wait a minute. If they know they'll actually spend more money by fighting than they would ever have to pay, why would they fight? The logic doesn't compute, which is exactly the point. Yet, it's something no one ever thinks about or considers. The fact is, dads are fighting for one reason and one reason only. Because they love their children. Because they want to tuck them in at night, be there for their birthdays, watch them graduate, and keep them safe. They're fighting because too many family courts, indeed all of society, seeks to reduce them to nothing more than being visitors in their own children's lives. And it's why you see terms like custody and visitation used in the law. Believe me, my friends, It's not by accident. It's deliberate. It adheres to principles that create division and rancor in order to maximize that rancor between the parties. By defining custody, which by its very name reduces the children to nothing more than pieces of property to be owned, they show there's going to be a winner and a loser. Someone is going to win the property that is the children and be financially rewarded for doing so. And the loser? Well, the loser will then have his time labeled as visitation to ensure that he, almost always the father, knows his place, knows he lost, knows he isn't a parent to his children anymore. He's nothing more but a mere visitor. That is the idea behind these terms, and anyone who tells you otherwise is a fool. And they most certainly haven't considered, let alone talk to these men and how it affects them. Nor do they care to. But it's more than that. So let's break this all down with receipts by examining 3 different states: Texas, New York, and North Carolina. And I want to make clear that I've chosen those states not because they support my claim, but because they represent the overwhelming majority of states. I've chosen them not because they're the outliers, but in fact the norm. And I've chosen them because they represent the political spectrum. One red, Texas, one blue, New York, and one kind of sort of in the middle, North Carolina. And we're going to start the discussion with Texas. All right, let's dive in and talk about how child support actually works in Texas. Good old Texas, land of brisket, football, and yes, one of the states where this myth is alive and well. But here's the reality. In Texas, even if a father is awarded 50-50 custody, meaning the child spends an equal amount of time in both households, child support doesn't just magically disappear. It's not like the judge stamps the paperwork and says, y'all split the time so no one's going to pay anything. Nope, even if he or she wanted to, they couldn't because the law doesn't work that way. Under Texas law, one parent is still typically designated as the NCP, non-custodial parent, for child support purposes only. And guess how they decide who that is? Well, 9 times out of 10, it's based on income. Thus, the parent who makes more, which is usually the father, is almost always assigned that title. Then they're the ones expected to pay child support to the mother, even if they have the children the exact same number of days as the mother. Hell, even if they somehow manage to have the exact same number of minutes as the other parent. There's no adjustments, no taking time into account. The person who makes the most, which as I said is usually the dad, though to be fair, more often now it's becoming mom, is going to be the one to pay. And what's the reasoning behind it? Well, the idea is to ensure the child maintains a consistent standard of living across both households, whatever the hell that means. Because in reality, it isn't defined to any real degree in the law. Again, something that is done deliberately. And yes, it all sounds good on principle, but in reality, it's a joke. Because what if the difference in pay is only a few $100 or $1,000? Well, in those cases, we are increasing the available income of the custodial parent while at the same time decreasing that of the non-custodial parent. And with the support only going from one parent to the other, it's going to automatically affect and reduce the amount the payer has available to take care of the children. So much for ensuring consistent standard of living. Under the law, one parent is essentially subsidizing the other. And on top of that, no one questions whether the receiving parent is actually using the money for the child. There's very, very little oversight on how child support funds are spent in Texas, or for that matter, in virtually every state. If mom wants to spend that money on a new car, vacations, or weekly hair and makeup appointments, and they often do, she's perfectly entitled to do so. No one is ever going to question it or even know about it because there's absolutely no oversight on how it's spent. And getting back to what happens if mom makes more, even significantly more than the father, does she end up paying him child support in a 50-50 split? Well, technically she's supposed to. Legally, she's required to, and that should be how it is, right? But in practice, it almost never happens. You'll find judges bending over backwards to avoid it, and if they do order it, find ways to reduce it as much as possible, something they almost never do when it's fathers who are paying. I have personally talked to dozens of fathers in Texas who've been told point blank by their attorneys or the court that mothers rarely get assigned to pay child support, even when they should be, even when the law says they are compelled to. So this idea that fathers are just trying to get 50-50 to dodge payments doesn't hold up when you realize that the law still makes them pay anyway. But that's Texas, you say. It's not like that anywhere else. Well, let's move on to New York, the Empire State, and my home state, though I escaped that godforsaken hellhole years ago. All right, so let's hop on over to New York. Big city lights, overpriced rent, and a family court system that loves to pretend it's progressive while still clinging to some of the oldest anti-father biases you'll find anywhere. New York operates under what's called the Child Support Standards Act, an act of which I am intimately familiar. And I'm here to tell you, in the cases where the courts grant equal physical custody, meaning both parents have the child an equal amount of time, where you think that financial responsibility would be split right down the middle along with it, it's anything but. Just like in Texas, New York will still pick out one parent to be the non-custodial parent for child support purposes. And surprise, surprise, it's almost always the one with higher income. Doesn't matter if you have your kids half the week. Doesn't matter if you're coaching their soccer team or packing their school lunches every day. If you make more, you're paying. Period. End of discussion. New York Family Court Act 413 lays it out specifically and with little room for ambiguity. The court looks at the combined parental income and then uses a formula to figure out what's owed. Time that the children spend with one parent or the other is irrelevant. It's not even a factor in the equation. Then they assign the non-custodial title to one parent and have them pay the other. Again, usually under the guise of making sure that the child enjoys the same financial resources in both homes. That whole, we need to ensure the child has an equal standard of living in both residences BS that we discussed earlier. You know, the one that says mom and the kids get to enjoy the 3-bedroom house, but dad, well, he gets nothing more than a studio apartment because after helping fund mom's lavish lifestyle, it's all he can afford. A scenario that isn't the exception, but the norm. And just like in Texas, occasionally, if the mom is the higher earner, she might, emphasis might, end up paying some support. In practice, you almost never see it. And I've personally witnessed it not being applied, not just in my case, but in dozens of others I've worked on over the years. There is a blatant cultural and gender bias that is baked into the system. Oh, by the way, it's also a blatant violation of the law, but when the foxes are running the hen house, who's going to hold them accountable? Judges, lawyers, and support magistrates will contort themselves into pretzels to avoid assigning a mother to pay child support, even when the numbers and the law says she should. And if a father dares to bring it up, he gets labeled as bitter, greedy, or trying to weaponize the children for money. But God forbid you ever say that about a mom, right? In fact, fathers may even lose primary custody if they dare to ask for child support. I know, because that's what was going to happen to me. It was made very clear to me that while I was being granted custody, there would be no support ordered to be paid by my ex. I was told point blank by my lawyer after she spoke to the judge that if I pushed for child support, the judge was going to reverse his order right there on the spot. even though he had more than ample evidence the children were going to be far better off with me. And that's not just my story. I've heard that story from hundreds of other fathers who did get custody. So again, this idea that fathers are scrambling for custody, for 50-50 custody, just to dodge child support is complete and utter nonsense. In New York, even if you get equal custody, you're still going to be paying if you happen to be the higher earner and, oh yeah, male. Doesn't matter how many nights you have your kid. Doesn't matter who's the better parent. The myth simply doesn't hold up here either. Now, let's move on to the Tar Heel state. All right, let's move on down I-95 south to North Carolina, a good old purple state where politics, well, you never quite know which way it's gonna swing. Except, that is, when it comes to family court custody orders and child support. Then it's pretty much the same old story we've been telling. In North Carolina, where parents have a shared custody arrangement, which is defined as each parent having the child for at least 123 overnights a year, child support is still awarded. And oh, by the way, quick side note, in case you're wondering, where the hell did they come up with such an unusual number? Why did they put into law the 123 overnights? Well, let's do a little math, shall we? You see, there's a thing known as the standard order. It's where generally the non-custodial parent has the children every other weekend and one night a week, though that one night a week is typically not an overnight. So doing some quick math, that means the non-custodial parent would have the children on 26 weekends per year for 2 nights, meaning a total of 52 nights a year. Far cry from the 123 overnights required in the statute to define it as a shared custody agreement. But let's go further. Let's assume the NCP does get the children overnight on the weekday visit. Well, now the numbers double. We have 52 overnights on the every other weekend, plus 52 weekday nights, giving us a total of 104, still below the 123. But wait, Dan, you're going to say, what about holidays and vacations? Well, again, typically holidays are split equally, and the NCP will get 1, maybe 2 full weeks of vacation time under the standard order. So let's assume we split the major holidays, which are New Year's, Memorial Day, July 4th, Columbus Day, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. Let's assume we split them equally. Well, that gives the NCP an additional 3 overnights per year, bringing us to 107. Then, for the sake of argument, let's max out that vacation time to 2 weeks, or an additional 14 days on top of the 107 total. And what does that give us as a grand total? 121 days, just short of the 123. Coincidence? I think not. Now, when it comes to calculating support, North Carolina uses something called Worksheet B to do the calculations. And again, I'm going to ask you to assume for the sake of argument that they do meet the criteria of the 123 days for a shared custody arrangement. In fact, let's go further. Let's say they pretty much have 50-50 time with the children. Let's also assume that dad makes a little bit more than mom income-wise. And for the sake of our discussion, let's make that assumption $10K. Dad's going to make $10K more per year than mom. Now, I didn't just pull that number out of my ass. I didn't just pull it out of thin air. It's based on the data that shows that full-time, year-round male workers in North Carolina have a median income of about $60,000, while their female counterparts come in at about $50,000. Hence the $10K difference. Well, in that situation, you'd think the system would account for the equal parenting time by making financial contributions fair, splitting it down the middle, right? No, not a chance. Because even here, in this situation, dad is most likely going to be paying support to mom simply because he makes a little bit more money. And oh, by the way, we haven't discussed this earlier, but it's a key point. Not only will he be paying her, he'll be paying the taxes in full on the amount he has to give to her, while she pays none for her little reward. And I remind you, In our scenario, the children are splitting time equally in each household. Yep, mom is going to get a tax-free supplemental income from dad, not to mention she'll likely get to take all the tax credits as well, and she can spend that money in any way she wants. Because again, there's no obligation or criteria to ensure that she's actually spending it on the children. Once again, we see that equal time does not mean equal financial responsibility. And as I just showed, the law was written in such a way that it almost assures that the NCP is going to still have to pay. The logic behind it is the same as everywhere else, to keep the child's standard of living consistent. Which, as I've said before, sounds great on paper, but in practice, well, my friends, in practice and in reality, it almost always means fathers are still writing checks to mothers, even when the kid spends half the year with him. And like in Texas and New York, what happens if the mother makes more? Does she pay child support? Well, as you've probably guessed already, the answer is rarely. I've heard from North Carolina fathers, including many in the military, who've been told by their own lawyers to not even ask for child support from the mother if they are awarded custody, simply because the judge will never go for it. It's really no different than in Texas or New York or any other state. But getting back to the original discussion, which is the claim that fathers only fight for custody because they don't want to pay support, what does this scenario tell us? Again, it shows that the claim women and mothers make, that the whole reason, the only reason fathers seek equal custody is to get out of paying child support, is complete hogwash. As we've shown with North Carolina, New York, and Texas, pretty much every other state, by the way, it's a pointless tactic. Because even with 50-50 custody, the higher earner, which is usually the dad, is going to pay. And if that's the case, why would they then spend $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, or even $100,000 in legal fees chasing custody, chasing 50-50 custody, only to end up having to pay anyway? The answer is obvious. It's not about the money. The dads are doing it because they want to be a father to their children. And that is what the case is all across states and all situations. It doesn't matter if the state is red, blue, purple, pink, or plaid. In the end, custody time doesn't have as much to do with child support as people want to believe it does. In fact, more often than not, it's not even a factor. It's income disparity that matters. And even then, that might not be the case. The truth is, the system is set up to reward mothers. In fact, to incentivize them to file for divorce, and then do everything they can to limit the amount of time the children spend with their father. All to maximize the amount of support being paid, which is not only a financial windfall for the mothers, but the states as well. That, along with the fact that judges and courts in general operate with a cultural bias that favors mothers financially, no matter how involved the father is why things are the way they are. The truth is, the system, judges, indeed all of society, operates on the assumption that fathers are supposed to be providers. The prevailing belief is that fathers provide no value to their children other than a monetary one. All right, I want to go back and reiterate an important point. The important point. If, in fact, avoiding child support were the primary motive, why would fathers invest tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees trying to secure equal custody? Especially when they know that the likelihood of them succeeding is less than about 15%. The financial burden of legal battles almost always exceeds the potential child support payments they would have to make. Any level-headed person would know that only a fool would spend more money to fight than they could possibly save by winning. Yet, this is exactly what politicians, courts, and most of all, women and mothers want you to believe. It's what they believe. And rather than acknowledge the reality that the true, deeper motivation, the true reason why fathers fight so hard and spend so much money on legal fees, is because they love their children and desire to be actively involved in their children's lives. As we've definitively shown, the assertion that fathers seek 50-50 custody solely to avoid paying child support is not only unfounded, but also dismissive of their genuine commitment to parenting. Are there some fathers out there who do fight because they don't want to pay support? Sure, of course there are. But is it most fathers? No, it's not. In fact, it's a very tiny, minuscule even, fraction of fathers. And as we've seen, even if they do win, even if they get equal or even full custody themselves, the likelihood is they're still going to have to end up paying, as laws across various states demonstrate. Child support obligations are determined not by children's actual needs or by the custody arrangements, but by income. So it's time we put this myth to bed. It's time we acknowledge the true reason and motivation behind the myth, which is to demonize and disparage fathers and incentivize mothers to break up their families. It's time we moved beyond the stereotypes and acknowledge the complexities of family dynamics and that fathers genuinely do love and care for their children. It's time we admitted the system is designed not to help children, but in fact to hurt them. If we as a society truly want to do what's right, if we truly want to say we need to operate in what's in the best interests of the children, then we need to foster a more informed and empathetic conversation about parenting responsibilities, and take away the financial incentive from not just mothers, but the courts, judges, and politicians, all of whom benefit from the system as it exists today. All right, what do you think? Should child support be abolished completely? Should custody and time the children spend with each parent be factored in? Let me know down in the comments, and feel free to share your stories as well. The more we all speak out about these injustices, the sooner things will change. And please consider sharing this video so that others can dispel the myth and learn the truth. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It costs you nothing more than a second of your time and really does help the channel grow. Really does help us to raise awareness on the issues that men and boys face. Helps us to spread the word and dispel these harmful myths. All right, that's it for now. Till next time, this is Dan. Have an awesome day.